Hey loves. Today I want to tell you a story I've never shared before. It's wild, messy, a little embarrassing, and, spoiler alert, involves me covered in ketchup and mayonnaise. Don't worry, I'll explain everything. Let me rewind to a year ago. I was burnt out from my job, feeling stuck, and needing something to shake up my life. My friend Sarah, who has always been the adventurous one, suggested I go to a swing party with her. At first I thought she meant like an actual playground swing party. I pictured adults spinning each other too high and puking on the grass. Fun, right? You know. She meant that kind of swing party. The spicy kind. Come on, it'll be fun, Sarah said, practically dragging me by the wrist. It's all about letting loose. No judgment, just vibes. I wasn't sold, but I was curious. And let's be real, my weekends were Netflix marathons and wine-fueled rants to my cat, Mr. Sprinkles. So I caved. We walked into the party, and immediately I wanted to turn around and run. It was in this fancy house with dim lighting and sultry music that made my heart race. Everyone there seemed so confident. Women in glittering dresses that hugged every curve, men with easy smiles that said, "I've done this before, and I'm great at it." Meanwhile, I was standing there in a dress that was one size too tight, wishing I'd worn something less clingy. Or a hazmat suit. Sarah left me almost immediately. Thanks, babe. I was clutching a glass of wine and hovering near the snacks, hoping I could just blend in. That's when disaster struck. This guy, who was trying way too hard, came up to me. He had this fake charm that made me cringe, and before I knew it, he'd knocked an entire plate of hors d'oeuvres onto my chest. An entire plate. I was standing there, drenched in ketchup, mayonnaise, and what I think was a very expensive brie. My first swing party, and I looked like a walking sandwich. It was mortifying. But then he took me by the hand and we went out to have fun. To tell you the truth, it hurt. At the end of the party, he smeared mayonnaise all over my face. I swore I'd never, ever go to one of these parties again. But Sarah, being Sarah, had other plans. The following week, she showed up at my place, all smiles and mischief. "You're coming with me again," she announced. I argued, of course. I brought up the ketchup, the mayonnaise, my complete lack of dignity. But Sarah wouldn't take no for an answer. "You need to give it another shot," she insisted. "Besides, this time there'll be a different crowd. You'll love it." Against my better judgment, I went. And that's when everything changed. The second party was different. The energy, the people, the vibes. This wasn't the fake charming, clumsy crowd from hell situation I'd endured before. The room was full of warmth, laughter, and, well, I'm just going to say it, mostly black men with the kind of confidence that makes you weak in the knees. They were fun, smooth, and had this way of making you feel like the most interesting person in the room. And they didn't spill anything on me, so that was a plus. I was hooked. That night, for the first time in what felt like forever, I let my guard down. I danced, I laughed, and I felt this amazing rush of freedom. There was no judgment, no awkwardness, just a bunch of people having the time of their lives. It wasn't what I'd expected, it was better. And it became my new thing. My weekly escape. But don't get me wrong, the road to getting comfortable wasn't all smooth. There were moments, funny, scary, and downright weird, that I'll be spilling in the next parts of this story. Trust me, you'll want to hear them all. Especially the time someone brought a snake to one of these parties. Yeah, I still have nightmares. But for now, let's just say that night marked the start of a very unexpected journey for me. One that's been equal parts hilarious, eye-opening, and, okay, occasionally sticky. More on that soon. Alright, loves, where were we? Oh right, my disastrous first swing party, followed by the night that changed everything. After that second party, I started to get the hang of it. I wouldn't say I was a pro at letting loose, does that even exist? But I stopped hovering by the snacks like an awkward chaperone. Instead, I started leaning into the whole experience. I'm not going to lie, what really drew me in was the crowd. And by crowd I mean the men. More specifically, the tall, smooth-talking, impossibly cool black men who seemed to glide through these parties like they were born to do it. I'd never met anyone with that kind of charisma before. You know that vibe where someone looks at you like you're the only person in the room? That was them. Let's just say it was a refreshing change from my ex-boyfriend, who once ghosted me for 3 days because his Wi-Fi wasn't working. Yes, really. The man blamed Wi-Fi for his inability to text. I digress. Anyway, back to the parties. The third time I went, I felt like a different person. I wasn't clinging to Sarah for dear life anymore, which, considering her habit of disappearing into the crowd, was probably for the best. This time I decided to just go with the flow. That's when I met Nate. Nate was tall, had a smile that could melt butter, and wore a leather jacket that somehow made him look both dangerous and approachable. How do they do that? Is there a manual? He walked up to me while I was trying and failing to dance in heels. "You're overthinking it," he said, his voice deep and smooth, with just the faintest trace of a southern accent. "Overthinking what?" I asked, immediately defensive because, well, he was right. Everything. "The music, the moves, those shoes," he said, nodding toward my feet. "Lose them." At first I thought he meant metaphorically, like I should let go of my inhibitions or something. No, he meant my actual shoes. Before I could argue, he bent down, plucked them off my feet, and tossed them onto a nearby couch. I should have been mortified, but instead I felt lighter. And not just because I was barefoot. For the next hour, we danced like we'd known each other forever. Nate had this way of making everything feel easy, fun, and completely unpretentious. It wasn't until I was laughing so hard I could barely stand that I realized this was exactly what I'd been missing. That night I discovered something about myself. These parties weren't just about the people or the music or the dancing, although all of that helped. They were about the freedom. For a few hours every week, I got to step outside the stress and expectations of real life and just be. It was intoxicating. Of course, not every party was smooth sailing. There was the time I walked in on a guy using the host's shower. Still not sure why or how that happened. And then there was the night someone brought out glow-in-the-dark body paint. And let's just say I went home looking like a human Jackson Pollock painting. But those are stories for another time. The point is, I kept going back. And every week I felt a little braver, a little bolder. My confidence started spilling over into other areas of my life too. I was standing taller, speaking up more at work, even flirting with a cute barista at my coffee shop. Still working up the nerve to ask for his number, but progress is progress. Oh, and Sarah. She was thrilled. She called me her star pupil, and started joking that I'd surpass her in party skills by the end of the year. I'm not saying she's wrong. But let's just say I haven't spilled food on myself since that first party. Growth, baby. But things weren't always sunshine and Nate-level smiles. There were moments that tested me, that made me question whether this was really my scene. One of those moments involved a very unexpected twist that I'll get into in the next part. Let's just say it involves trust, a broken rule, and one of the most awkward mornings of my life. You won't want to miss it. So, have you ever had a moment where you let loose and found yourself in the process? Or is this all sounding completely insane to you? Let me know in the comments. I swear the crazy stuff is only just getting started. It was one of those sultry summer nights when the air felt heavy with possibility, or at least that's how it felt after my second glass of rose. Sarah and I had arrived fashionably late to a party that was already in full swing. The house was buzzing, the music was perfect, and the crowd? Even better. This particular party had a new energy to it, a kind of reckless abandon that made the air practically hum. Now let me paint the scene for you. The room was full of familiar faces, but there were also a lot of new ones, mostly men. And when I say these guys were something out of a dream, I'm not exaggerating. Tall, sharp-dressed, oozing charisma. It was like someone had cast the entire party from a Netflix series about impossibly attractive strangers. One of those strangers was Marcus. Marcus was intense. Not in a creepy way, but in a this guy could talk you into robbing a bank and you'd thank him afterward kind of way. He had this quiet confidence, the kind that didn't need to boast. And when he locked eyes with me from across the room, I swear my knees almost gave out. Now, up until that point I'd been pretty good about sticking to my own rules. I kept things light, fun, and never got too tangled up in anything or anyone. But Marcus. He was trouble wrapped in a perfectly tailored suit, and I was too curious to resist. We started talking, or more accurately he started talking, and I just kind of melted into a puddle of, please keep saying things in that deep velvet voice. Before I knew it, we were on the dance floor, and I was laughing like I hadn't in ages. Everything about him felt magnetic. But then things took a turn. Halfway through the night, I saw Sarah storming out of the room. Her face a mix of anger and something else I couldn't quite place. I followed her, of course, because that's what friends do. When I caught up to her in the hallway, she was pacing like a caged animal. "What's going on?" I asked, genuinely confused. She whirled around to face me. "You need to be careful with Marcus," she said, her voice sharp. I blinked. "Careful? What are you talking about?" "Look, I know he's compelling," she said, choosing her words carefully. "But he's not exactly a rule follower. Just trust me on this one, okay? Now, here's the thing about me. I'm not great at taking vague warnings seriously. Shocking, I know." So instead of heeding her advice, I went back to the party, determined to prove that everything was fine. Spoiler alert. It wasn't fine. Later that night, Marcus suggested we step outside for some air. The patio was gorgeous, with twinkling lights and a view of the city that took my breath away. We started talking, really talking, and for a moment it felt like the rest of the world had disappeared. But then, out of nowhere, he leaned in and said, "I have a surprise for you." Now, a normal person might have been wary. But me. I was riding the wave of good vibes and bad decisions, so I said, "Okay, what is it?" He didn't answer. Instead, he took my hand and led me down a path that curved around the house. Before I knew it, we were in a secluded garden area, far from the party. And that's when I realized I'd made a mistake. Standing there was another guy, a friend of Marcus's apparently, and the two of them exchanged a look that made my stomach flip. "Wait," I said, holding up my hands. "What's going on here?" Marcus smiled, but it wasn't the charming, disarming smile from earlier. It was something darker, more calculating. "Relax," he said. "We're just having fun." Fun. It was the kind of fun that didn't feel fun at all. My heart was pounding, my instincts screaming at me to leave. "Yeah, no," I said, backing away. "This isn't my vibe." For a split second I thought Marcus might try to stop me. But then his friend stepped in and said, "She's not into it. Let her go." That was all I needed to hear. I turned and practically sprinted back to the party, my heart racing. When I found Sarah, I collapsed into a chair beside her and blurted out everything. She listened quietly, then gave me a look that said, "I told you so," without actually saying it. "That's why you have to trust me," she said softly. Lesson learned. The rest of the night was a blur, but one thing became clear. Not everyone at these parties was as carefree and genuine as they seemed. And Marcus. He wasn't worth another second of my time. But here's the thing. Even though that night rattled me, it didn't ruin the experience entirely. Just taught me to be more careful. The next party was a fresh start, and I made sure to surround myself with the right people. Because as wild as these parties could get, they also had the potential to be something beautiful, if you knew where to draw the line. And that, my friends, is where we'll pick up next time. There's one last story to tell, and trust me, it's the wildest one yet. Stay tuned. If you've made it this far, you've survived ketchup disasters, glow-in-the-dark body paint, and a close call with Marcus the rule-breaker. But let me tell you, nothing could have prepared me for what happened at this party. It was the last swing party I went to before deciding to take a little break from the scene. Not because it wasn't fun, it totally was. But because, as you'll see, some things are just too wild to top. Sarah and I arrived at the party fashionably late, as usual. This one was at a sleek penthouse in the city, complete with floor-to-ceiling windows and a rooftop terrace. The theme was masquerade, which meant everyone was wearing masks. Think mysterious, elegant, and just a little bit chaotic. Now, the thing about masquerade parties is that they add an extra layer of intrigue. You're constantly guessing who's behind the mask, which can be fun, or mildly terrifying if you accidentally start flirting with someone you shouldn't, but let's not talk about that right now. The night started out like most others. mingling, laughing, dancing. The music was louder than usual, the drinks were stronger, and the energy in the room was electric. But then, somewhere between my second and third martini, things took a turn. Started with a game. Someone announced it in the middle of the room, and suddenly everyone was gathering around to listen. "It's a scavenger hunt," the host said, their voice muffled behind a gilded mask. "Rules are simple. Find the items on this list. First person to complete the list wins." Sounds harmless, right? Except the items on the list weren't normal things like a book or a key. No. This was a swing party scavenger hunt. The items were, let's just say they were personal and intimate. First I thought, no way. I'm not doing this. But then Sarah nudged me, her eyes gleaming behind her mask. "Come on," she said. "It'll be fun. Besides, you're great at this kind of thing." "Great at what?" I asked, genuinely baffled. "At being bold," she said with a grin. And well, I couldn't argue with that. So there I was, diving headfirst into the most ridiculous game of my life. One of the items on the list was a red feather, which I found stuck in someone's boa. Another was a secret whispered by a stranger, which led to a surprisingly heartfelt conversation with a guy named Andre who told me he secretly wanted to be a chef. Go, Andre! But the real kicker, the final item on the list was a kiss from the person whose mask matches yours. Here's the thing. I hadn't even noticed that my mask had a match. It was a simple black lace mask, nothing special. But when I turned around, I saw him. Standing across the room, holding a glass of whiskey and leaning casually against the wall, was Nate. You remember Nate, right? Mr. Lose the Shoes from part 2 of him. He was back, and apparently he was my masked twin for the night. Now, let me tell you, there's something about seeing someone you've danced barefoot with at a swing party suddenly reappear in a room full of strangers. It's like the universe is winking at you. Or laughing at you. Either way, my stomach flipped. I walked up to him, my heart pounding. "Well, this is awkward," I said, holding up my scavenger hunt list. He glanced at the list, then back at me, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Awkward. Or fate. Okay, let's pause for a second. I know it sounds cheesy, but trust me, in the moment it felt anything but. Are you just going to stand there, or are we going to win this thing?" he asked, tilting his head toward the list. And before I could overthink it, he leaned in and kissed me. Now, I'm not saying the entire room cheered, but it felt like they did. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't thinking about whether I looked silly or whether I was doing the right thing. I was just happy. After the scavenger hunt ended, we won, by the way. Nate and I spent the rest of the night talking, laughing, and watching the city lights from the rooftop terrace. He told me about his job, his love of jazz, and his dream of traveling to Japan. I told him about my chaotic first swing party and how these nights had become my escape. By the time the party wound down, I realized something. These parties weren't just about the freedom or the fun. They were about connection. About finding those moments of joy and clarity in a world that's often way too serious. That was the last swing party I went to, for now anyway. But it's safe to say it won't be my last. Because if there's one thing I've learned from this wild, sparkling journey, it's that life is too short not to take risks, embrace the chaos, and dance barefoot when the moment calls for it. So what do you think? Have you ever had a night that changed your perspective on everything? Let me know in the comments. And as always, thanks for coming along for the ride.